All right, welcome to episode number 55 of the On the Blue Line podcast. This is called Monday Morning Roll Call, and I am your host, Wayne Mulder. This week, making decisions on principle. The Monday Morning Roll Call starts now.
On my honor, I will never betray my badge, my integrity, my character, or the public trust. I will always have the courage to hold myself and others accountable for their actions. I will always uphold the Constitution, the community, and the agency I serve.
So, welcome, whether you're joining us on video or you're joining us in the podcast or however you came across this, welcome. This week, I want to have a different kind of discussion with you, and I'm going to talk about the subject of ethics, which you noticed I did not put in the title. I primarily did not put it in the title because I knew that you would probably have never even hit the play button. Why is that? Why do we immediately roll our eyes and kind of go into thinking about what we have to do that day and everything else when a supervisor or somebody brings up the idea of ethics? And if you're listening to this and you're not in law enforcement or you're not in this type of career, first responder, etc., this is still a very important conversation because it bears in mind or it brings to mind how we make decisions and why we make the decisions that we do. And that's why I named it what I did, is making decisions on principle, because ultimately that's what it's all about. It's why do you make the decisions that you make? So, one reason why I think this is a timely conversation is because of the strange times that we're in. Whenever things are going crazy, which we all know from the news is exactly what's going on, whenever things are going crazy, there's always brought to question decisions that people make. And people will make decisions out of fear. They will make decisions for other reasons that they wouldn't typically make because they just aren't sure what to do because of the craziness that's going on in society. So I figured that this could also be a timely conversation to really make you think and make me think about why we make the decisions that we do. A lot of this is going to be based on the principles of ethics as put out by the ethical dilemma test that the National Institute of Ethics put out. So when I say that mouthful, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, what in the heck does that even actually mean? Well, ethics, by the dictionary definition, is moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. So, then your next question would be, well, I think I know what moral means, but what exactly does it mean? Well, moral is concerned with the principles of right or wrong, behavior, and goodness or badness of human character. So, in other words, it all comes down to what are the principles that are based on right and wrong that govern why you make the decisions that you make. See, it's not as complicated or as scary as we all think it is when we sit down and we're like, oh, I've got to take an ethics class in college. That's what comes to mind, and you're like, oh my goodness, this seems very convoluted, but it really isn't. In fact, the ethical dilemma test is really just pausing to consider if a particular behavior is right or wrong. It questions things, right? It questions your motivations. It questions why are you doing what you're doing. It gives you short-term considerations. And we're going to go through each of these, but in broad strokes, that's what it does. It gives you short-term considerations. It gives you long-term considerations and how it's going to be judged long-term. In fact, it gets you to stop and pause for a moment and say, okay, this is what this action may lead to down the road. It's a true importance principle is what I'm calling it. In other words, is what I'm thinking of doing as important as I believe it to be right now? And I'll get a little bit further into that, but what I call the true importance principle. Also, the feelings principle. How's this action going to make me feel when it comes to light? And then the others principle. How is this focused towards others? I found an article that I want to just share with you. This is an old article, so these numbers have probably gone up substantially. But when I was searching for this whole idea of ethics and ethical principles and ethical pre-planning and so forth, one of the things that came up with this article, and in this year, not this year, but the year that this article was written, 71 law enforcement officers nationwide were killed in the line of duty. And we all know that those numbers have gone up in recent years. But that same year, 1,350 officers were entered into the National Decertification Index. So what does that mean? That means 1,350 officers. So 71 were killed in the line of duty, but 1,350 of them had gotten in trouble and lost their certification, in most cases for doing something stupid. Or said in a better way, making poor decisions. So that's why this matters. It could cost you your job, it could cost you your family. And even again, if you're not in law enforcement, it could cost you your reputation depending on what you do. So there's certain questions, again, put out by the National Institute of Ethics, and these questions, some agencies want them to be front and center for you. I know some agencies even put them like on the back of Miranda cards, or I've seen other little cards at different agencies around the country that they keep in their vehicles so that if you come across something or if you're trying to make a decision, you see that on a regular basis. And it isn't like every decision you make, you're going to stop there and pull that card out. I don't think that's realistic. But what happens is you see it over and over again. Maybe it sits above your visor, maybe it sits in your pocket, and you're looking at it over and over again. And as you're looking at it, you begin to think about, you know what, maybe I need to rethink my thinking, right? So here's the questions. So the first one is, am I acting out of anger, lust, peer pressure, or greed? It's a motivation question, right? It's a question as to what is my motivation in this? You can do right things for the wrong reasons, and sometimes those wrong reasons will come through. People who get involved in a use of force, for instance, and they do it out of anger or they do it because they feel personally, they're not doing it based on the facts and circumstances, they're doing it because of some personal slight. It may not end well. They may be justified and there may not be any issue, but then again, you have to pull into question your personal motivations. So, am I doing this out of anger? Am I doing it out of lust? Am I getting into this relationship or am I doing whatever while I'm at work, which we all know is going to end up costing you your badge because of lust? Am I doing this because of peer pressure? Am I doing it just because everyone else is doing it? Just because everyone else is doing it is usually the worst reason to do about anything. So keep that in mind. Or am I doing it for greed? Or am I doing it because of some self imposed belief that I need money, that, maybe because things are going really bad and like, I don't know how I'm going to survive. So now I'm going to make a bad decision, an immoral decision based on this greed. So then the second question is my decision legal? So that's pretty solid, right? Like that's pretty straightforward. We can make that decision. Is what I'm doing even lawful? Now, here in a few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because that doesn't necessarily mean it's an immoral decision or a moral decision, but I'll get to that in a second. Another question is, would I do it if my family were standing beside me? Now, I call this the God is always watching principle because of how I grew up. In fact, with my mom, when I was a kid, she would sing these children's school songs. And one of them was, "Oh, be careful, little hands, what you do." And it would go through hands, what you do, feet, where you go, eyes, what you see, ears, what you hear. It went through all the little thing. And then, of course, there was little hand motions that went with it. And fortunately for you, I'm not going to try to sing it. However, it was this principle of, oh, be careful, little hands, what you do. Oh, be careful, little hands, what you do. For the Father up above is looking down in love. Oh, be careful, little hands, what you do. And then it would go through all the other ones. It's the God is always watching principle, or my family is always with me principle. Doing whatever it is at this moment that you're deciding you're going to do, would you still do it if someone else was in the room with you? And if you learn to think that way, and I credit my mom for having me do this from a young child, but if you learn to think that way, then you will often make the right decision because you're not going to make some really poor decisions if your family is there with you, or if you, depending on your faith, if God is there with you, however you want to look at that. So the next one is, how will it make me feel in 20 years? So this is one of those long-term questions, right? Like I mentioned earlier, will you regret this moment? Will you regret this decision later on in your career? Are you going to be nearing retirement and you're going to be like, you know what? I've done a lot of good in my career. And then there was this one moment, this one time that I did this. And again, it doesn't have to just be law enforcement. It could be in life too. We could get 40 years down the road and there could always be that one moment, that one time that a decision was made. And don't get me wrong, we all make mistakes. We all make decisions that we may or may not regret down the road, but there has to be a standard by which we judge whether or not this is a right decision or a wrong decision. Next question, is it worth my job or my career? And I like this question because, like I was referring to earlier, it brings into bear a very important dialogue. As I thought about this answer, it actually can be yes. So in most cases, that's not going to be the situation. Remember, not all things that are lawful are moral, and not all moral things are always lawful. So This is a much bigger rabbit trail. I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail in this short one, but just know that we have been very blessed in our lives in this country that for the most part, this hasn't been an issue. I know it hasn't been in my life and lifetime, and in most of the people who are listening to this, it hasn't been in yours either. But just know that in history and other countries, the ethical decision, the right thing to do, may not always be in line with the government, with the law, so again, just in the broader sense of this conversation, just know that there may be a time that it is worth your job or your career because it's the right thing to do. But that's a different conversation and a little bit more convoluted than I want to get into in this. But in general, in most cases, the wrong decision is not worth your job or your career. So make the right decision in those situations. Next question. What would I do if I were being videotaped? The reality is we all know that this day and age, you probably are being videotaped. Somebody probably has a camera on you, whether it's on a business that you're next to, whether it's in your car, whether it's when you're in a group of people and they're standing out there, somebody somewhere has a video camera on you. And how would you behave if you're being videotaped? And one of the issues I think this day and age, as opposed to when these rules or these thoughts were written, is the fact that we kind of become nonchalant to the fact that cameras are everywhere. So oftentimes people make decisions not even thinking that the cameras are on them because they're always on them. So just something to think about. Would you still do it if the video camera was on you? The next one is, would my loved ones be proud or ashamed? It's kind of going down that same question, right? Of what would happen if my parents were with me? What would happen if God was with me? If my family was with me? If anybody was with me, would I still make this decision? And then lastly, is it following the golden rule? And this isn't the golden rule that he with the gold makes the rules. That's a different golden rule. But this is based on the do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or the treating others as you want to be treated. You know, this one alone would solve most poor decision making for most of us. If we just treated other people how we want to be treated, if when we go into a decision, if we go into a deal, if we go into a conversation and we just try to treat them in the same way that we want to be treated, it would solve so many of these issues. So, this is not just a law enforcement thing, and I'm going to say it over and over again. In fact, I would argue that this is an everyone thing. If we want strong families, if we want strong leaders, if we want strong communities, then we have to learn to act and interact in a manner that is based upon moral code, that is based upon ethical principles, based upon the why do you do what you do. And that's the question I want to leave with you this week. I want you to take time and I want you to think about, why do you do what you do? Is it based on these type of questions? Is it based on some broader right or wrong? Why do you actually do it? Because a lot of people will go through their entire lives and never think about why they do what they do, why the actions, why the decisions that they make are the way that they are. So know your why, and that's what I want to encourage you to do this week. There's a quote that I've quoted several times in the book Passion of Command. And in there, he's quoting Colonel Craig Tucker, and he says, do the right thing at the right time for the right reason, and you cannot go far wrong. So that's what I want to encourage you on this week. Make sure that we're doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason. And then I know that we are going to be better for it. That does it for this week's Monday Morning Roll Call. I hope to see you next Monday at Roll Call. And in the meantime, I'll see you on the Blue Line. Hey everyone, Wayne Mulder here, and just real quick, I want you to do two things for me right now. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, but if you haven't done this before, if you would do two things for me, whatever medium that you are listening to this podcast on, would you do me a favor and roll to the bottom of it? There should be a way to leave a rating and a review, and if you would do that for this podcast, you have no idea how helpful and beneficial that would be to keep this message getting out to the people that need it. And secondly, all of the Monday Morning Roll Calls are also available on YouTube as a video format now. So if you would, go to the OnTheBlueLine YouTube channel, and on there, if you would just click subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it, and then you'll be notified when more of those episodes come out on a weekly basis. Other than that, for news and any information on what is going on and what we're doing going forward, I encourage you to go to ontheblueline.com. That website has been completely revamped in the last 10 days, but ontheblueline.com. Thank you.